Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Hockings. Welcome to World Have Your Say. We've got a packed program for you today. We're talking about the huge reaction there's been to the shooting dead of more than 30 miners in Marikana. Many of you are shocked that you're seeing images like this again in today's South Africa. And later in the program, we'll be looking at whether the conflict in Syria is spilling over its borders into neighbouring countries. We'll be live in Beirut, Turkey and also in Johannesburg. Do tweet us. Our hashtag is WHYS. The shooting dead of more than 30 miners in South Africa is being described as the country's bleakest moment since the end of apartheid. Many of you have been getting in touch with us here on World Have Your Say to express your shock and also your concern about what this means about the state of the country now. Before we talk to some of our guests in South Africa, let's speak to Torai Maduna, who is a journalist with 7 Eyewitness News. He joins us now from Marikana in the northwest of South Africa from the mine, and he witnessed the events yesterday. Thanks very much for being with us, Torai. Just take us through what you saw and what happened.
Well, it was just before 4 p.m. local time when police decided they've had enough of the protesters. Initially, earlier in the day, there was a press conference where the police said the strike was going to end. Don't ask us how we're going to do it, but we're going to end it. So just shortly, just before 4 p.m., the police descended and they said to the miners, now we've had enough, we're moving in. They threw tear gas, and the next thing was just gunfire everywhere. And then in less than 2 minutes, the bodies lying all over.
And what is happening there today?
Well, there was a press conference this morning where the police commissioner confirmed that 34 people had died. And we're just here back on the scene where the shootings happened. We're expecting the president to come here. We don't know if he's still going to come, but we're just waiting. There's a large media contingent here. And just not far from me, there are a group of women, about 50 women, that are protesting here. I was speaking to them earlier, and they're saying that we don't want the police here. The police are killing our men. Our men, all they want is money to sustain us as a family. So, and there are also crowds from the village nearby where the shooting is happening, and there's a large also police presence here today.
What is the atmosphere there, Torai? How tense is it?
Well, it's not as tense as it was yesterday, but it's just a precautionary measure for us to stay away from the protesters because we don't know what is happening. But the women that are close to the police here, they are just demonstrating and singing, but the police are just watching, but there are no altercations or anything like that. The police are just watching them as they protest and sing and chant their demands.
Okay, Torai, thanks very much for joining us from Marikana there, the mine where yesterday's shooting happened. Let's get some reaction to what happened yesterday and what is continuing to take place in South Africa. Tebogo is with me from Johannesburg. She is in London at the moment on her gap year and is with us here in the studio. Cedric de la Harpe is a tour operator who is in our Johannesburg studio. Quinton is a junior lecturer from Potchefstroom, also in South Africa, who is with us now. Thank you all very much for joining us here on World Have Your Say. Tebogo, if I can start with you, when you see those pictures again, when you heard about what happened yesterday, how did you feel?
I thought it was appalling. I was shocked. It was just terrible to see that, you know, in South Africa, in a country that's been a democracy now for over 20 years, just to see images like that, really, it was just really shocking and just terrible. It really upset me.
How about you, Cedric?
I was shocked, not that it was unexpected. It was building up during the day. The questions I've got is that, to start with, this group assembled at 7 o'clock in the morning. They said they were waiting for the mine management to come and talk to them. Why did we have to disperse them at 4 o'clock when we are an hour and a half away from sunset and they would have gone back home again for the night? And if we then wanted to secure that hill, we could have secured the hill when they'd gone to bed. We hear everyone in the media talk about the fact that they were threatening because they were carrying tribal weapons, but they are a part of their tribal culture. You will not find them walking around during the day without his kiri, without his machete, whatever he's into, he'll be walking with it. So we, as society, turn around and say that they were threatening because they were carrying their tribal tools, not even weapons.
Quentin and Potchefstroom, what about you? Your reaction?
Initially, I was shocked to see the final shooting, but I mean everything that led up to the protest itself. I think that was not a shock to see it escalate into this kind of violence, because, like I stated earlier this morning, it's becoming a daily trend in South Africa. Violent protests are increasing, and especially in the industrial sector, where people are not getting paid all that well. And before 1994, people were actually fighting for political freedom. But after they got to political freedom, they did not have the economic means to sustain themselves. And what we're seeing now is an effect of economical freedom, the term that they're using now. They're fighting for the economical freedom because they do not have enough money to take their children to school. They don't have enough money to buy gas to drive to work. They don't have enough money to buy a nice house. They don't even have enough money to buy food. And I think this is basically just an escalation of everything that has happened in this country in the last couple of years. This is only an escalation towards this. And this is what they are calling this the ticking time bomb that South Africa is sitting on. Is the unemployment in this country, and especially the majority of the youth that do not have a job. And I mean, these people are fighting for a higher salary. They do have a salary. But what about all the people that don't have a salary? What will happen when they start getting violent and they start getting upset because they cannot afford to buy food anymore?
Okay, well, let's bring you some comments that we've been receiving on our Facebook page. Natasha is in Zambia, and she posted this comment. This was a reasonably kind of common comment that we got on the Facebook page, actually, saying this is not a battle between armed and unarmed, but two armed parties. The police, having exhausted all options, choose one that is obviously regrettable. This is perhaps reason to revise labour laws and up training of law enforcement. Tabogo, what do you think about that the police, she would argue, were acting in self-defence?
I agree with her comment that says that the training of the police definitely needs to be reviewed. I mean, I can't think of a single justification for police people to just open gunfire randomly and shoot randomly at protesters. And yes, the protesters, well, I mean, I wasn't there, but I've heard that it was a violent protest. And yes, violent protests do happen, but I think the police definitely need to review how they deal with those situations. The situation was definitely poorly handled.
Cedric, you mentioned earlier that these miners were carrying machetes, which is something that they do. It's traditional. But the police were also reacting because they've already lost two of their men in the conflict at the mine over the past week.
I think that what we've got to look at in this whole concept is that if they were reacting because they lost two of their men on Tuesday, then this is a revenge attack on a group of people who were peaceful. I'm yet to see media show me where there was violent protest during the day. In general, we see them sitting quietly on the hill, and if they are, they're chanting with their weapons, they're singing. Where was the violent and where was the threat during the day? That I didn't see. They were waiting for management to come and talk to them. Now, I heard earlier on in the day the media will say that they were like Zulu impies in terms of the threat. But we have employed, the mines have employed that type of person to do that job. You will not get them anywhere else in South Africa. So we go into African culture to bring people to mine this wealth for us. But then when they've got a problem, we expect them to behave like Western norms. And we say that they should not be African under those circumstances. Now, if they were sitting on the hill and they wanted management to talk to them, why did management not approach them and talk to them? Why bring in the police and stimulate this whole conflict? And it is what happened there today is not related to the fact that they needed more money, they wanted more money. Because do you kill people because they want more money? Do you kill people because they are demanding? There's something deeper than all of what took place there, a lack of understanding of the African culture.
Okay, Cedric, thanks very much for that. I just want to bring in another comment that we've had on our Facebook page from Marikana, who says, I am a cop not far from the mines where these shootings happened. The bosses of the mines fail their workers for so long, and when the situation turns ugly, they call us. Remember, 2 of ours were killed. Were you expecting the same thing to happen while we fold our arms? Just to give you there the perspective from someone who is a police officer. We did speak to people who were sympathetic to the police. Many of them declined to come on the programme. Let's bring in Luzo now, though, who is from Malawi but is living in South Africa. Thanks for being with us, Luzo. I know you've lived in South Africa for 10 years now. What was your reaction to what you saw yesterday?
I was absolutely horrified. We've never seen anything like it. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying to think that people who want a living wage are going to get killed in this country for protesting and for asking for a living wage. It's a shock, but I think we have to get now beyond just saying that we're shocked, and every time something like this happens, it just goes away. Yeah.
Is that your worry, that there'll be a lot of focus now in the media and then nothing will actually change?
Well, nothing has been changing. These protests are nothing new to this country, and they're escalating. But how many times a year do these kinds of protests actually happen in South Africa? Every time people demand a wage increase or demand better living conditions, they must toy. They must march. When are people going to be finally heard? When are they going to be finally listened to? It doesn't seem that the government is taking notice of them, or mine owners will even pay them any attention unless blood is shed. It's all about greed. It's evil, actually. That's just my opinion.
Okay, Luzo, thanks for that. Everyone stay with us. Just to tell you, we've been getting calls from Nigeria, from Germany, from Ghana as well. So lots of calls are coming in. If I could just bring you back in, Cedric. How much dialogue is taking place? Do you imagine that out of this might come something good, that things could change?
I think the problem is that the dialogue is not taking place between what I call the Western cage and the African rural cage. We are talking in this media circle here, and we are not talking to our African culture. The sooner we understand that we as Western culture need, when I say dialogue, not only dialogue when there's a problem, we need dialogue on a daily basis right at the rural area. We need to understand the culture of the African person. We need to understand why they are carrying those tools on a daily basis. And we need to understand that when they sit on that mountain in a group and they ask to have someone address them, all we needed to do was to follow African culture and approach them, call the police off. The police should not have been sent off. I don't blame the police. The police should not have been sent in there. Management, someone needed to go in there and sit 50 meters from that group and wait until their leaders came to talk to them. That is what they were expecting. They were expecting someone to come and talk to them, but the decision was to move them off that hill. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when it's almost time to go home, and why at that time in the afternoon were they putting barbed wire into place? For what reason? Did they want to trap them on that hill for the night? Okay. By 5 o'clock, those people would all have gone home and they would have reassembled the next morning, and we could have taken any steps to protect the hill if that is what we wanted to protect. Okay, we need to understand African culture at the lowest level, and when there's peace, not only in conflict.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Cedric. Everyone, do stay with us. Thanks so much for contributing to the conversation so far. As you can see, there's lots more to talk about. Do stay with us here on World Have Your Say. Let's talk to Savannah now, who is taking your calls in the World Have Your Say newsroom. Savannah.
Hi, Savannah here from the World Have Your Say newsroom. We're getting calls in from across Africa. We're getting calls from Nigeria, South Africa and Gambia so far. Oze in Nigeria says, we're shocked to see what is happening in South Africa. Why have the government not given a response at this stage? And a caller from South Africa is saying, what needs to be said is that what do the police do when they are fired upon? And Abubakar in Gambia is saying demonstrating is right. They have the right to demonstrate, and so they should be left to do that. But a lot of people are also of the feeling that either you're in support of the police or you're in support of the miners. And the miners, they need the support, they need to be helped. And the police, people are saying that they have the right to fire at them. So keep those calls coming in. We'll be here all afternoon manning the phones.
Welcome back to World Have Your Say. We're talking about what happened in South Africa yesterday with the shooting dead of more than 30 people by police at a mine in South Africa. There has been a huge amount of shock in South Africa and, of course, a lot of discussion about what this means about the state of the country today. Let's bring you a comment from our Facebook page. Sarah posting on the page saying, why is everyone, though, so shocked or outraged? South Africa has been badly run, corrupt and dangerous, also unjust since the ANC took over, just as it was before. But to bring you this statement we have received from the ANC Youth League, who has said, we call on South African society to support the Youth League in its call for urgent, equitable and just redress to return to the people the mineral wealth beneath the soil. The South African Police Service, mandated to serve and protect us, cannot ever also turn into a bloodthirsty killing machine. So those are the words there of the ANC Youth League. Let's bring in some of our guests again. Returning to us is Quinton, who joins us from Potchefstroom. Quinton, when you heard that statement from the ANC Youth League calling for the nationalisation, really, of the mines, does that have widespread support beyond the kind of grassroots level of ANC?
I think just what we need to clarify is, I think the ANC clarified in a recent policy conference that nationalisation is not part of ANC policy. Okay. I will not comment on whether nationalisation will be good or bad for a country. Like I stated earlier, the country is sitting on a ticking time bomb with people not having enough money to buy food. They don't have enough money to buy a proper house or even a vehicle. And this needs to be addressed. And I personally feel that the problem lies deeper than just giving resources to people, giving people jobs. People need to be able to get jobs by themselves. They need to be able to create an economy. Because what we are finding now is we have this big economic pool of money, and we want to distribute all of that, but we're not creating anything new. While the economy is going forward and there's more and more people coming into the economy, we are not creating more wealth. So I think the solution should go. The core problem comes back to education. If we have a proper education system where people are empowered and people have the skills to create wealth, to create employment for themselves, then we will not see these kind of protests. If people are able to enter the job market, get a proper salary, then they will not have any reason to protest about it.
Okay, Quinton, thanks for that. We can also bring in now Liliana, who joins us from Grahamstown. Oh, she's not with us yet. We hope to speak to her in a moment. Let's return to Tebogo, who's with me here in the studio. Tebogo, I know you were here in London for just a year, but when you look at this, what happened yesterday in South Africa, do you see it as an isolated incident, or are you a bit like Quinton, that you see tensions rising across the country?
I definitely see tensions rising across the country, and an incident like this happening in South Africa is definitely going to have repercussions. I can't imagine something so awful happening and people not responding. And it does make you question the future of South Africa, but I just choose to stay positive about it. But I think the government definitely needs to address the fact that people's basic needs just aren't being met. People can't afford food, they can't afford proper housing and all of that. So there's definitely a lot of issues that need to be addressed, but yeah, I'm interested to see what will happen.
Luza, you're still with us. You're from Malawi, but living in South Africa. What would you say to Tebogo there? Is it as deep as that? Are you questioning the future of the country?
I am questioning the future of the country. I'm questioning the leadership, the current leadership actually, which has been failing the people for quite some time now. You know, when the new dispensation came in and it was all, you know, all of a sudden people had a hope once again. And 18 years on, a lot of people's living conditions have not changed at all. So when you think that people have been waiting for a long time for changes to come to their lives and it's not happening, and the anger has just festered and it's just boiling over. This is about frustration. It's not about African culture, as some other commenter may have said, when they're trying to come to the table and get a fair or decent or living wage for themselves and are waiting on a hill with no carries and bangas, and they're threatening violence. It's not about African culture as such. It's about anger that has just it's gone over the boiling point. And when we're sitting in our cushy lives, you know, when we're middle class or whatever we are, and we don't understand that kind of pain or that kind of poverty, we don't come from that kind of pain or poverty, you know, it's very hard for us to understand why people would go to those lengths and demonstrate with weapons and with such kind of anger. It's not African culture. It is deep-seated anger and a hurt. And when they've been asking probably for years for this living wage. I mean, it's all over the country. People in various sectors are looking for better lives for themselves, and companies are greedy. They're not willing to meet them at the table, to sit down with them and give them what they want.
Cedric, you're still with us. Here at the BBC, we have been saying this incident is one of the worst of its kind since the end of apartheid. It's such a powerful word with such strong connotations. Is that being used in South Africa? Are comparisons being drawn at all?
Yes, I personally feel, and when it comes to Sharpeville and the comparison with Sharpeville, I only became aware of Sharpeville myself and the incidents when I studied it in the last 2-3 years. But when I talk to survivors of Sharpeville, this rings a bell in total as to what has happened today. The whole response to Sharpeville also tried to find reasons why this took place. I asked why the police opened fire in Sharpeville, and I asked again why. Because as much as what people say that this was a violent protest, I saw no sign of a violent protest until the police moved in with the barbed wire, until they went into conflict. They were not threatening anyone until that stage. And when I talk about culture, when African culture, a man walks around with those as part of his dress, surely that's African culture. Do we need him at that stage? We're using his African culture to mine the mines. Do we need him at that stage to say, fella, you're now not to behave like you would in terms of African culture, even if he's cross? And also what we're missing here is that these people are earning 4,000 odd rand. Yes, they're demanding up to 12,000, and that is an issue. But what we're missing is that this demand is directly related to a production bonus that was promised to them some time ago. There are other mines in the area where the miners doing the same job are earning 15,000 to 20,000 rand a month. So the issue is not related necessarily to the fact that here we have a poverty unemployed group. We've got a group that are producing and just want what was promised to them. That is the anger. It is not linked to the anger of the country and that we can expect this. We're almost trying to say that this is an acceptable thing because the government has failed.
Okay.
No, this
Cedric,
is
I just need to quickly interrupt you there, because this comparison with Sharpeville has been made quite a few times to remind everybody this is when police fired on a crowd in 1960, which led to the start of the armed struggle in South Africa. Denise has emailed us to say, I am highly irritated that this incident has been compared to Sharpeville. The two incidents are completely unrelated. The country is working hard towards democracy. It's not utopia, but apartheid is in the past. Do stay with us here on World Have Your Say. forget, you can continue our conversation about the state of South Africa at the moment online. Just to bring you a few of the comments we've been receiving in the past few minutes on Twitter. Wally says, as a South African, I'm appalled by this incident. Violence isn't the answer. Why didn't the ministers, police commissioners and mine owners resort to this? And then Jerry in Lagos said they call it self-defense. From what? People carrying tools, not even weapons. This is so, so sad. One more just to give you a flavour of what we've got. Cindy in South Africa, what about the cops that get hacked at? These reports are always so one-sided. Come and live here before you judge. So as you can see, lots of different opinions on the shooting dead yesterday. More than 30 miners in South Africa. Do go online and continue the conversation. But now, to what we are being termed in the media and across the Middle East, the Syria spillover effect. Is what is happening in Syria, the conflict there, affecting neighbouring countries? That's the next focus of our conversation. With me here in the studio is Baria Al-Madin, the foreign editor of Al Hayat. Baria, thanks so much for joining us again. It's a big topic. What's your first response?
My first response, this has been coming, really. Everybody expects this. Everybody expected that. Everybody talked about it. Everybody thought it's coming. And of course, Lebanon is the most vulnerable of those countries. We have seen also a considerable increase of troops, of arms on the borders with Jordan. There have been many incidents on the border with Jordan. Also in Turkey, we have seen also violence increasing in Iraq. This is this is just really the icing on the cake. I think we should expect more, unless and until the crisis in Syria is solved. I think the whole area is threatened, and I dare say my country, Lebanon, is the most threatened of them all.
Is there a particular concern about Lebanon, so fragile at the moment and so vulnerable, really?
Yes, indeed, of course it is, and we've seen what happened the last few days. Indeed, last week we have seen the capture of a previous, an ex-minister, a minister of information, Michel Smeha. He was caught in the crime. He was videoed. He was caught by the police. He's now being charged. This charge was that he was carrying explosives to create mayhem in the country, to indeed kill senior figures in the establishment, and like the Maronite patriarch, also other politicians, also to kill as many people as possible, starting from the north of Lebanon, which is a place in Lebanon that is known for being vulnerable. As you know, Lebanon is part of the area. The Sunni-Shia divide is very present and very real over there, and I'm sure that the Syrian regime knows about that.
Okay, well, Barry, let's just get a sense of what it feels like to be in Lebanon at the moment. Nazri Atala joins us from there, and also Jason Nash, who is a journalist in Istanbul, is with us. Nazri, how does it feel on the streets of Beirut at the moment?
Well, it's always tricky to say, because on a regular day, Beirut feels quite safe, ironically. But there's just, I guess, a sense of increasing lawlessness. And I'm not sure if that's connected yet to the spillover from Syria, but there is a sense of increasing lawlessness.
What's been the reaction to the Gulf states telling their citizens to leave?
Some people tend to think it's an overreaction. I would say that any country would do that if their citizens are threatened. So they would tend, England would do that, France would do that, and Lebanon would do that if it happened to Lebanese citizens in other countries. So there have been direct threats against Gulf citizens, which apparently are now subsiding. But so, I guess they'll take decisions as things come up.
Let's just bring in a comment from Robert Fisk of the Independent newspaper, who has said the spillover is fast becoming as dishonest as the lies invested in its promotion. So like gangrene, fear spreads across Lebanon when it needs a surgeon's dissection. Does that feel true, Nazri? Are people fearful?
Well, in a sense, Lebanon's been tense for a while now, and I wouldn't relate it directly to Syria necessarily. There's been, right now what I feel is there's a breakdown of the Lebanese state, so it feels like the state is a bit impotent and powerless at the moment, and I think that's what's scaring people the most.
Mackenzie Lewis is with us. She is the editor of Time Out Beirut. Give us your sense, Mackenzie, of how things are there at the moment.
Hi. Things are definitely a little bit different than usual, but people are moving on with their daily lives, definitely.
Can I ask both of you, Nasri and Mackenzie, does anyone talk about the threat or the fear of another civil war?
I would say that for now, the threats of civil war are a bit exaggerated. I wouldn't put this in the category of civil strife. I would put it more in the sense of lawlessness, and I mean, this is a region, I mean, which is famous for its conspiracy theories, but I think there are a bunch of plots being kind of elaborated right now, and I think the state needs to reassert some control here.
What about you, Mackenzie?
I think we're definitely feeling a bit of a difference. I don't know about concerns on a day-to-day basis of a civil war, but I think, you know, it's definitely in the back of people's minds, and people are being cautious and people are being careful. And yeah, I think that's...
Baria, do you think it's overstating things when people talk about that?
I think so, and I'm amazed at what Nasri said there about the link to Syria. Of course it's linked to Syria. This government in Lebanon now is known to be pro-Syrian, we all know that. And for it not to keep the law and order in the country, what we saw 2 days ago on the television screens of Lebanon, of tribes calling themselves, taking charge of the screens of various television stations, also carrying arms, very heavy arms, I would say that it is not overstating it. And yes, there is fear. I was in Lebanon 10 days ago. Many politicians, actually most politicians, do not dare leave their homes. Many people fear going out in the night. And also let me add that this is tomorrow or after tomorrow is going to be declared the Eid. And Eid, usually the country is filled with people from Saudi Arabia, from Bahrain, from Qatar, from Kuwait, all over the Gulf, and this is where people make their money. The hotels are practically empty. Most airline tickets that have been sold, all the is been cancelled, reservations. So it's a very serious thing that's going on in the country. And I do understand the Lebanese are resilient, and it would feel normal. I felt normal. I still went out at night 10 days ago when I was in Lebanon, but it is serious.
Let's bring in Jason just to get an idea of what the effect has been in Turkey. Obviously, Jason, we've seen so many pictures of the thousands of refugees pouring over into all of Syria's neighbours. But what other effect is there in Turkey?
Well, I mean, firstly, perhaps just to pick up on what the previous speaker was saying, what we've actually noticed in Turkey is that there has been an upsurge in tourism from the Arab Gulf to Turkey, which has actually been positive on the economic side. However, the negative side is, of course, trade that used to pass through Syria has completely died with the closing of the border. Other aspects that we're starting to see in terms of a spillover include a rise in PKK activity in the southeast of the country. I mean, the Syrians have basically taken off the brakes and allowed the PKK to become more active. I think recently there was a member of the Republican People's Party who was kidnapped and has recently been released. And there have been attacks on various Turkish security force locations and patrols. Another thing which I think needs to be, there's a potential spillover which hasn't arrived yet, and it's about the refugees. And that is, Syria is going to face a major deficit in wheat in the coming months, and I'd predict by, I'd say, the late autumn. The only way it's going to be able to satisfy that demand is if it gets wheat from, for example, Russia, the Black Sea wheat trade. But there's a question of how do you pay for it? And then, even after you land it, how do you distribute it? So we could see a massive influx of refugees if the food situation becomes critical in Syria in the coming months.
So, Jason, do you see Ankara upping its involvement in Syria, perhaps militarily?
The problem is Ankara is really finding itself in a bit of a stuck position. It was hoping that the Syrian National Council would be able to unite the various opposition groups, and it was betting on a quick solution to what was going to happen in Syria. The Syrian security forces have proven to be a little bit more resilient than others were suspecting. So for Ankara at the moment, naturally, the game gets doubled down, it's doubling its bets, but remember that Syria's allies in this entire conflict, such as Iran and Russia, are also Ankara's major trading partners, especially on the energy side.
Let's bring in a comment from Daniel Al-Bayman, who has been writing in Foreign Policy magazine. It's the fragility of Lebanon and Iraq in particular that leaves them vulnerable to new civil wars of their own. It might be hard, but it is not impossible to envisage a regional war growing from all of this. Do you agree with that, Jason?
Regional war, I think that Turkey naturally tries to avoid any massive conflicts when it comes to other countries. It still has the core foreign policy idea of peace at home, peace in the world, and that still very much complements the new government's policy of zero problems with the neighbours. Would the Turkish armed forces have the potential or the ability to move into Syria? Naturally, there's no question about that. However, is there the willingness? The difficulty is with the AKP, the ruling party, they are perhaps nervous about doing it, but ready to move ahead. However, the opposition parties in Turkey are very much against any sort of foreign adventurism from the government.
Jason, thanks so much for that. What do you think? Do you think that this concern about civil war in countries like Lebanon is overstating it as a result of what we are seeing in Syria? Do get in contact with us. Our hashtag is WHYS, and we're also looking at Facebook every second or so. Don't go away. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. I'm Lucy Hawkins. We're talking about the spillover effect from the conflict in Syria onto neighbouring countries. Let's just bring in a comment we've had on our Facebook page from Jody, who is in Virginia in the United States. She says the Syrian conflict has already spread beyond Lebanon. At no other time in recent history have the various political and religious factions in the region openly backed opposite sides in a local conflict. Well, let's talk a little bit more about Lebanon. It really does seem to be one of the flashpoint places. Baria Al-Madin is with me, still the foreign editor of Al Hayat. We've seen scenes of sectarian violence already, haven't we, Baria, in cities like Tripoli? I mean, there is already a sectarian conflict that is affecting people.
Absolutely, indeed. As I said, I actually come originally from Tripoli, and the situation in Tripoli has been worsening since months now. Also, I'd like to bring in another element in the conflict, especially affecting Lebanon, which is the possibility of an Israeli strike on Iran. Indeed, we know that Hezbollah has made noises, and Iran said on the record that they expect Hezbollah to take part in such a war. That, of course, would create a regional war. I don't think, of course, Syria is in any position to interfere to help Iran. Nevertheless, this will complicate the regional issues.
Okay, Barrett, we're going to bring in Habib Bata, who is a journalist and a blogger from Beirut. Thanks for being with us, Habib. Do you get a sense that things are intensifying in Lebanon as a result of the fighting in Syria?
Yes, I think it sometimes seems a bit worse than it is. It is a gradual build of low-level violent events. The violence in Tripoli has been going on for years, actually. So it hasn't been a great intensification when compared to the past. But these recent spate of kidnappings are definitely worrying a lot of Lebanese people when the Lebanese government isn't really taking a strong stance on the issue, and people are wondering, what the reaction will be when we see masked gunmen taking hostages and having them interviewed by the local press. It's a bit disconcerting to a lot of people. But again, this has been relatively isolated, so I mean, life does go on in Beirut.
Life goes on, but tell me about your experience coming back from the airport on Wednesday.
Well, there again, I mean, the roads were burning. It's not actually that atypical for the roads to be set ablaze in Lebanon. Tires are a form of political protest in the recent years in Lebanon. So actually the roads of Lebanon are all scarred from tire burning. But it was a bit disconcerting actually to come off a 20-hour trip, and then I actually asked the customs agent, I said, what's going on in the country tonight? And before he stamped my passport, he said, oh, there's bombing and there's shooting and there's kidnapping, everything. Did you bring your weapons with you? So this is kind of the cynical, and he kind of smiled and winked. So it's a kind of cynical Lebanese humor and the reaction to this. And we've even seen a lot of parodies on Twitter and Facebook of the clan that has been doing some of the kidnapping. So people are still taking it a bit lightly in some sense. Other people are a bit more worried. So we actually had to drive. When I was coming out of the airport, I could see the tires being brought in. I just narrowly escaped the road being blocked, but the road again was reopened, within hours. So these kind of road closures are typical. I wouldn't say that that's a huge escalation, having tires burning on the highway. And even the travel warnings we're seeing today are not really that new. They are a repeated pressure tool, I think, from the Lebanese government, used by certain governments that are supporting the rebels in Syria. to kind of pressure the government to take a stand on what's happening. So we've seen that.
But Habib, we've been asking our other contributors whether they feel that it's overstating it to say there are real concerns of a return to civil war in Lebanon. What do you think?
I think that language is premature. There has always, the Lebanese government has never been a very strong central government. It's always been very decentralized. The problem is when there are events that require mediation, that happens through a lot of negotiation. When the situation in the region is more tense, when political developments are greater than Lebanon can handle, then there is a little bit of tension. I think that the longer the situation continues in Syria, the more difficult it will be in Lebanon. So there is a hope that things will eventually settle somewhat more than they are settled right now. Okay. But again, I would say it's low-level violence in a number of different areas in Lebanon, but it hasn't really affected the general population.
Okay, Habib, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have to end the program. Thanks so much to all our contributors for joining us. Just to remind you, on World Service Radio tonight, our program continues. We'll be talking about one of the most closely watched trials in Russia's recent history. The punk band Pussy Riot found guilty of hooliganism and sentenced to jail. So do join in that conversation. Thanks for being with us.